A surveyor, Scott Rasmussen, not Rasmussen Reports, but Scott Rasmussen himself, who I think is a better pollster than his former company. He's now the president of RMG Research. He conducted a poll, and I missed this yesterday when I was talking about cruise ships and coffee. The left wants you to give up your coffee and cruise ships because of global warming. What they did is identified people with postgraduate degrees living in cities earning more than $150,000 a year. They surveyed those people. Those people are considered the elite, and there are a lot of you who classify in this, but you're not in the massive urban enclaves. You may be in cities like, I'm in middle Georgia, but you're not New York, you're not Chicago, you're not Los Angeles or San Francisco. The elite, though. And by the way, you should know if you have a postgraduate degree and make over $150,000 a year and live in a city, you actually are in a pretty elite demographic. So Rasmussen polls these people and finds out that the top 1%, particularly those with Ivy League degrees, think that you have too much personal freedom. Your freedom of speech needs to be curtailed. Your food should be rationed. You should be forced by power of government to eat differently than you do. You should be forced by government to reduce your electricity consumption to save the planet. Essentially, they want to ban SUVs. They don't want you to be on airplanes, even though they can be on airplanes. They're huge, huge supporters of Joe Biden. They are huge supporters of government regulation. They are the antithesis of freedom. You won't be surprised to learn that these are the same people who think that Israel is the bad guy after Hamas slaughtered thousands of Jews on October 7th. Israel's the bad guy, and Hamas and Gaza are the victims. And these are the same people who want an open border, and it's all related. And I want to dwell on that a little bit. To dwell on that, you need a little bit of a history lesson. We need to go back to the early 1600s. A war broke out. That war actually started in the late 1500s, called the 80 Years' War. And it was a war that had a lot to do with the spread of Protestantism across the continent of Europe. A number of city-states within the Holy Roman Empire and other territories began to convert to Protestantism. The Dutch began to wish the Dutch were a Spanish Netherlands, and they wanted to be their own republic. They wanted to be their own entity. And the Dutch nobility were converting to Protestantism, and the Protestant and Catholic Dutch got along with each other, and actually they all resented the Spanish. And they started a war, and that war kind of got out of hand and began to spread. And then they took a long peace and got to what we call the 30 Years' War. From 1618 to 1648, continental Europe was in war. The British were mostly removed from it, and the French were mostly removed from it. And it actually, because it was such a brutal war, there were parts of Germany that lost 50% of their population. This was a war then where it was essentially Protestants versus Catholics, more precisely, the Imperial Alliance of the Spanish Empire, the Habsburg Monarchy, the Catholic League, the Holy Roman Empire, at war with various states of Protestantism and territories of Protestantism within the Holy Roman Empire. You had Saxony, Brandenburg, Prussia, Hesse-Kassel, Denmark, Norway, the Dutch Republic, Transylvania, Savoy, Sweden, the Kingdom of Bohemia, others. They all went to war with each other, and it was a bloody, bloody, brutal, brutal war. And then things began to consolidate, and France entered. And the Holy Roman Empire and the Spanish Empire, they fought the French and the Swedish. The Dutch, the British, Englishmen stayed on the sidelines for a while. And ultimately, there was peace. The peace was settled through multiple treaties, and the peace was ultimately called the Peace of Westphalia. The Peace of Westphalia determined a couple of things. One, it established the boundaries of nation states. And two, it essentially was the modern understanding that foreign powers should not meddle in the domestic affairs of other sovereign entities. Foreign powers should not meddle in the sovereign affairs, domestic affairs of other entities. Now, what does this have to do with the wokes and what we're seeing today? Well, the Peace of Westphalia came out of Western civilization and began the rubric under which international law exists today. And all of that comes from Europe and white people. You see where this is headed. The critical theorists argue that white people are oppressors. And because white people are oppressors, the things that derive from whiteness, including the Peace of Westphalia, their oppression. So the boundaries of Israel are part of white colonizer oppression established through the United Nations, controlled by the white people of Europe, the United States, among others. They set up Israel, so Israel is an illegitimate country of colonizers, even though the Jewish people are returning to their ancient homeland that predates the Palestinians. And also, what's one of the things I said about the Peace of Westphalia? It recognizes the modern nation state, respect for borders, respect for the internal domestic politics of sovereign nations. Well, if borders come from the Peace of Westphalia, and borders don't technically come from the Peace of Westphalia, but the modern nation state and the idea of it does, and the borders that come with that, well, then that's something created by white colonizer oppressors, and therefore the idea of the modern nation state is itself an oppressive rubric under which white people control others. Therefore, mass migration of the oppressed non-white people fleeing the colonial regimes of South and Central America into the white man's territory of North America that the white man took through oppressive conquesting measures, we have to all go along with it. Because this isn't the Great Reset per se, but they're resetting the balance between the oppressor and the oppressed. That's what's going on here. That's what's going on. That's why this open border thing is a larger deal. Yes, it has a lot to do with stacking the Electoral College, boosting populations of progressive states, but a lot of them, they're okay keeping them in Texas. They're okay keeping them in Texas and Florida. So you have to ask yourself, so what puts this all together? What puts it all together beyond the Electoral College game? For those of you who aren't familiar with the Electoral College game, a number of Democrats are fine with this mass array of illegal immigrants coming across the border and moving into progressive areas because the census is what determines representation in the House of Representatives. That in turn determines the Electoral College. And under the census, we count people residing in the United States, not citizens, not legal residents, everyone. Legal and illegal, we count them all for purposes of the census. So you bring in a vast array of illegal aliens, you settle them into an area that might otherwise lose population, and suddenly their population goes up, their census number goes up, therefore their House of Representatives, congressional delegation goes up, therefore their Electoral College improves, therefore they game the system for population through illegal immigration. But they're okay with them hanging out in Texas and Florida and southern states, where it also helps their Electoral College. So what is the rationale between all of them? It's critical theory. Borders are the tools used by oppressive white people. The idea of the modern nation state comes from the Peace of Westphalia. It was the rubric behind which all international law, including the international law applied to Africa and Asian countries, South American countries, well, it all derives from European history, and therefore it is illegitimate because it's white oppressors who came up with it. They essentially are perfectly happy to discombobulate and extinguish the modern idea of the nation state as something colonial, as something white and oppressive. And along with that comes the abolition of your freedoms. Your right to free speech can be used to speak out against this, and that is bad. Your access to electricity puts you at a greater advantage than the poor Africans who don't have dishwashers and washing machines, other than locals who actually do the dishwashing and the washing of clothes. So that's bad. It puts you at an advantage. It makes you, the oppressor, more likely to be able to oppress. It must all go away. It is this idea that is so pervasive in postmodern progressivism that is so destabilizing. That's what we're seeing at the border. It's what we see with the protests for Hamas. All of this is tied together in this rubric of intersectional power dynamics. It is a Marxist theory that the left has wholly embraced. And in the process of this, it allows men like Trump and others to thrive because what they can point out is it doesn't work. I mean, just think about this. Our federal government is unable or unwilling to protect the border. But it's beyond that. So I was reading, I subscribed to a Substack by a guy named John Ellis, and he sent out this piece by Philip Howard today. Let me read you part of this. Trump carried every county in New Hampshire except one, and now a solid majority in New Hampshire. What accounts for the juggernaut? He obviously embodies something many voters want. My take is that all of his serious rivals, now just Haley and Biden, have promised to be better leaders of the established order. But Trump embodies rejection, even disdain for the establishment. As in 2016, he is lapping his challengers with his contempt for the Washington establishment and indeed for democracy itself. Americans are angry, and traditional campaigns based on character, policy proposals, and baby kissing are not resonating. Trump's riding a wave of pessimism. Bret Stevenson, the New York Times columnist, the center-right columnist, writes, quote, "The brokenness has become the defining character of much of American life. Broken families, broken public schools, broken small towns, broken inner cities, broken universities, broken healthcare, broken media, broken churches, broken borders, broken government." The system is failing. The elite have failed. They can't defend us. They can't defend our border. They can't protect us from criminals. They let the criminals out of prison. They can't protect our small businesses from shoplifters. They can't teach our kids. They have to indoctrinate our kids. They have to surgically experiment, castrate, and go after our kids in harmful ways that sterilize our kids. They've lost the mission. They've lost the focus. The elite are failing, and so the country is failing, and the backlash is coming. And the backlash is coming because these elite have embraced the power dynamics of Marxism, which are incompatible with a capitalist country. They haven't been able to convert the capitalist country into a failed Marxist state. Look, it's not a coincidence that in Europe there's a rise of right-wing populism also coming with this human invasion of illegal immigrants in Europe from Africa and Asia. You're seeing right-wing populism rise everywhere the elite don't take borders seriously, and the elite don't take the borders seriously because they've decided that the borders were imposed by a bunch of white people in the 16 and 1700s, and they're therefore oppressive and illegitimate. Critical theory is unraveling the Western state. But here's the thing. The people don't actually want the state unraveled. They want the elite unraveled. And they're working on doing that. And if the elite don't pay attention and don't promise fixes and don't show they can fix and don't fix, not only are you not going to stop the Trump train, you're going to get run over by a mass horde of legal citizens rushing to power to stop the invasion that you don't want to stop and also to stop you from controlling the rest of our lives. There will be hell to pay for what the elite are doing. And you can't blame the people for rising up against them, even if in ways you don't like that it manifests. It's a worthy cause to purge the progressive elite from institutions of power. They've screwed up everything. They've broken the system. And now they don't even respect our national sovereignty and borders.